Hi, I'm Dogshit at Video Games. This is Elden Ring, and welcome to the beginning of my new series of videos where I'll be bringing up games that I perceive as having elements of gaming perfection and games that fail to bring about that perfection, and try to explain why they are perceived in that way. Before I begin, a decent sized spoiler warning. We're going to go into a few mechanics, bosses, art styles and whatnot that may be spoiler worthy, and if you're worried about spoilers, I would suggest looking through the timestamps and checking everything out. Disclaimer, this is my first playthrough of a Souls game ever, but I am in the process of going through Bloodborne. Take this review in terms of a first comer to this series, but also as someone who can tell if a game is objectively good or not most of the time. For people who don't know, Elden Ring is a game in a long-running series of JRPGs developed by Fromsoftware, which are known for their difficulty, deep lore and niche gameplay that appeals to a somewhat wide audience, with Elden Ring being an exception and being a market dominant in the first half of 2022. This, I believe, is due to Elden Ring having these aspects of gaming perfection that allowed this game to do so well. Now, what I'm going to try to do is explain this perfection by starting with what I appreciate about Fromsoftware is that they take their gameplay that everyone is used to from previous games and slightly change it with each iteration of game, and somehow these slight changes can have a big impact on the gameplay. For instance, the differences between Bloodborne and Dark Souls. Dark Souls is more slow and methodical, where Bloodborne is more offensive and attack worthy. You do a lot of attacking and aggressive attacking, where Dark Souls you have to wait for the right moment to attack and get as many hits in as possible. Elden Ring is sort of a mix between the two. We have very aggressive enemies, but you also have to wait to attack those enemies at the right time. This doesn't mean that the gameplay is strictly slow and methodical. Aggressive attacking is definitely viable. In Elden Ring's case, it has a few things that set it apart from the other games. For instance, every enemy has at least one attack which is a prolonged wind-up that punishes panic rolling and mistimed dodges. This essentially is one of the changes they made to Elden Ring to set it apart from Bloodborne and Dark Souls and the like, as well as other things such as large AoE attacks. What the fuck? Now, where Elden Ring differs from other games in the industry is mostly in its combat. For instance, when you attack, there is no way to break an animation on your own. Once you commit to an action, that is the action you will perform. Elden Ring also has action build-up like all Souls games, where pressing buttons repeatedly will line up an action after the previous one was performed. I could press and press roll. The roll won't cancel my attack animation, but I'll perform a roll directly after I finish my attack animation.
Roll.
This form of attack style puts weight on all of your attacks, giving a sort of risk reward to do certain actions. You could do a long winded up attack to do lots of poise damage and a hit for a large amount of health, but you obviously get the risk of being comboed into oblivion. Fuck me! You could also do light attacks, jump attacks and special moves, which all come with their own pros and cons. Situational awareness is really key in this game. However, I think the game may falter when it comes to jump attacks, as there's little downside. They're quick, strong and heavy on poise damage. The only downside really is if you do get hit whilst you're in the air, you're vulnerable for a very long time while being stunned on the ground. Get the fuck up, get the fuck up, get the fuck up, get the fuck up. The combat system also plays into the role-playing aspect. You can build your character in any way you like in the game. Turn yourself into a hit tanking machine.
I'm okay.
Or into a crazy overpowered mage. Every Souls game's combat mechanics are very complicated and in depth, and this game is no exception, and I think it would be too long and boring for me to go through it here and now. I would also rather it be a surprise and a learning curve for someone new to the game if you ever play this game specifically because of this video. Who knows? And to be honest, I probably understand the system less than someone else who you can find a video on YouTube who can explain it much better than I can. Either way, I think Elden Ring's combat is thoroughly enjoyable, and part of the experience of Elden Ring is to learn and understand the combat system in your own unique way. Elden Ring has a special type of exploration. The Fromsoftware games are known for their exploration, but I think Elden Ring takes that to the next level. Elden Ring is an open world game, and most open world games are supposed to take exploration into priority. Elden Ring does this, but I think better than any other game that I've ever played. The level design in Elden Ring is remarkable. You would be wandering around the open world, come across a cave, explore the cave, oh nice, kill some decently hard enemies, find a relatively useful item, and then kill the boss of that cave. Okay, this is fucking unfair. This was essentially the gameplay loop in the open world. You never knew exactly what you would find in a dungeon or cave. The amount of these areas was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, some dungeons even had their own dungeons inside of them. An example would be the sewers of Lindell placed underneath Lindell themselves. Yeah. And because the combat system was engaging and the exploration was exciting, I would be intrigued to go into caves and dungeons to see what I would uncover in terms of items and who I would come up against in that cave or dungeon. While exploring, I sort of turned my brain off and would just sort of explore the open world without really thinking about any goal in mind, but just exploration. Why does this even exist? This to me signifies great game design simply because the player can do whatever they want. But due to the game design, the player simply ignores everything else in the game, for instance the story, and just explores. Is this the main quest? That is the essence of an open world game. This exploration system also ties heavily into the combat system.
R1, roll.
Combat system is very complex, but the exploration is simple. You just walk around and explore. They tie very well together. I have not been engrossed in a game's exploration like this since the release of Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2018. However, me explaining this exploration system doesn't really do it justice. The exploration system is there to give you an unhomogeneous experience, and that is what can make a game feel unique to you. Everybody takes experiences differently. You could have the exact same experience as someone else in this game, but you'll perceive it differently. And that, I believe, is one of the reasons why this game has done so well. But this does not mean the exploration system has no problems. Successive playthroughs of Elden Ring may become tedious. This is mainly due to the exploration itself. Going into New Game Plus wasn't such a chore because you would have most of the items you needed anyway, and the second time you would play through you would discover places that you never discovered before. Fuck! The problem was starting a new character or new game. The issues would come about because you may have explored all of these areas before, and these areas all have significant items that may increase your combat skills, but somewhat became tedious to do simply because you've done these things before and there was nothing new you were seeing.
Fuck you for the fourth time!
The magic of the exploration is really in the first and second playthrough, because when you're exploring the lands between, the game really does just pull you in and keep you there for a very long time, and it is a magical experience that is hard to come by. But after all this explaining, I can't really invoke the feelings that I felt when playing the game and exploring. It really is just about you experiencing it yourself and nothing else. The main feature of Elden Ring, the bosses,
I'm immune!
is one of the many reasons why Elden Ring is such a great game. See, Elden Ring has 160 bosses that we currently know of. and almost all of them are repeated. I've read online that only about 9 bosses aren't repeated in the game, and this number could change according to what happens and how many things people discover. This sometimes does inhibit the game's ability to be unique with its bosses, and that's why this category has the name that it does. This lack of unique bosses is probably the most talked about issue in Elden Ring. This isn't the craziest issue because you won't be finding all 160 bosses on your first playthrough. However, my main issue lies when you get further on in the game where the story progresses you, some bosses that you fought in the past simply just become normal bloody enemies. This is blatant plagiarism. This can hinder the player's sense of progression. Maybe once you defeat a boss in the early game, you feel like you have done better, you've improved. But now that you encounter this boss as an enemy from the early game, you may feel like that unique experience that you learned from in the past wasn't so unique after all and was just a way to press you forward by wasting your time. It sort of ruins the uniqueness of that first battle and that first learning curve with that original boss. However, on the other side of that coin, it could make you feel more powerful, as in you've defeated this boss in the past and now you look at it as, oh, look how far I've come, that a boss in the past who gave me a hard time that I have to learn for is now an enemy, and I've progressed so much that they're just an enemy that requires barely any of my time. I think I was quite lucky in my first playthrough. I didn't feel like the enemies were becoming more homogeneous because there was less unique enemies. I sort of just played the game and really enjoyed it, because I think a lot of the boss fights in Elden Ring are done extremely well and pose a very big challenge to the player, except for a few.
Get off me, you filthy whore!
Either way, I think it's a valid criticism that should be presented. Moving on, I do think Elden Ring has a lot of great boss fights to offer. I think the best fight in Elden Ring is Godfrey's fight, the second last boss in the game. I think Elden Ring at its peak was at this fight. Why I think this is because Godfrey poses a large challenge to the player. He's very fast, does a lot of quick attacks, and you have to time every attack very well to dodge them, but also leaves attack windows that are very small, but if you utilize all those attack windows, you can get the job done quite quickly. But it requires very good timing, very good skill, and everything that you've done in the game previously to this point really culminates in this battle with Godfrey. It's weird how it works because this is the second last boss fight in the game, but it sort of shows all the skills and all the acquirements you've made throughout your playthrough at this point, and it's the final wall to finish the game where you take on the last boss. But weirdly enough, I think this boss fight is better than the last boss fight, the Elden Beast.
God almighty!
Then there's another boss, the first story boss encounter most people come across in the game.
Someone must extinguish thy flame. Let it be Margit the Fell.
This boss, a lot of people talked about right when the game came out. They said he was one of the best bosses in the game. Everybody was basically talking about him because he was extremely difficult. And to be honest, I tend to agree. When I first played the game and first came across Margit, I did hear the rumblings in the community about people talking about Margit and how good of a boss he was and how hard he was and whatnot. And I did enjoy the boss fight extremely well. At some point, I was getting frustrated, but every bloody Souls player gets frustrated. And how could I not mention Margit, because he's really the first boss for most people that really sort of teaches you the rope of a real good and well done boss fight. And also, again, for most people is probably when the game really started for them, where they really started to kick it. Like, Margit was really the place where you either stopped playing Elden Ring or you basically finished Elden Ring, because from then on, if you kept playing, you finished the game. What Margit teaches the player is the main mechanics of most boss fights in the game, where they have long winded up attacks, and like I mentioned before, it punishes panic rolling. Margit is really just a great learning curve for every player getting into the game. He does invoke the sort of skill required for each boss fight, sort of progressing from then on out, as well as gives a good challenge to be able to sort of get you flowing into the game, to understand, okay, this is not just going to be a cakewalk. This is the first boss I've encountered. He's already giving me a hard time, and now I have to sort of use what I've learned from this boss fight and sort of carry that forward for the rest of the game and use this knowledge. That's essentially why Margit is such a great boss. There sort of are way too many boss fights in this game to even try and start mentioning all of them and talking about them. Some great mentions will obviously be Radahn. Christ alive! Godfrey, of course. The Elden Beast. Rykard is also a great fight. It's very unique in terms of that it's great visually.
Can't fucking see anything!
It's amazing visually. It's not a very hard boss fight. And then that sort of transitions to one boss fight, which I also really love, which is the big fucking dragon in Farum Azula. Yeah, I'm fucking dead. The reason I like that boss fight so much is that it's one that is not encountered unless you go out looking for it or stumble across it. It's a very unique boss fight as well. Great visually again, but in general, it's just really cool that you can find these kind of bosses sort of in the back corner that even have their own cutscenes and everything, but you really have to go out of your way just to find them. It feels a lot more rewarding than just sort of going and progressing through the story and then finding a boss in that sense. This sort of feels, it's just a lot more rewarding to find something that you never really expected, comes out with a cutscene. It's a great fight. It's very astonishing to look at. It just feels a lot better and invokes a better feeling than just stumbling across a normal boss fight in terms of the story. That's not to say that story bosses don't invoke any feelings in you or invoke the same feeling that this previous boss that I've just talked about invokes in you, but I would say that the story bosses invoke more of a progression, which makes a lot of sense, rather than a rewarding feeling. Although they do, in the sense, when you beat them, also even getting to that stage of the game also is very rewarding, but you can see that when you do find a boss that is hidden somewhere where you have to go out of your way on a hidden path, something like that, it is, and it does feel a lot more rewarding than in the sense of finding something rather than progression. I could keep talking about this for so long, but I think this section is already too long, but I needed to talk about it. And to be honest, I'd rather players who ever do play Elden Ring, the boss fights are probably one of the main experiences you'll have in the game, and it's better to have them as a unique experience. So anyone who's watching this video and hasn't played the game yet, that is what will make or break the game. This is probably my favorite topic in this whole video. Elden Ring has some of the best visuals that I've ever seen since Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2018. This doesn't mean that Elden Ring has good visual fidelity.
This game looks great.
But what it has is a unique and beautiful art style. It is one of the first things that I notice when playing the game, when you first enter Limgrave and just see the landscape in front of you. It's awe-inspiring. This also doesn't mean that the game is realistic in terms of its art style. It just means it looks great. Every landscape in the game has its own art style and unique vision, and it really does convey a sense of wonder. Where the fuck am I? What I don't understand is all the complaints on social media about the quote-unquote graphics of Elden Ring. Because if you think this game looks shit, you're a fuck. What I think people were doing is that they were saying that the graphics were bad, but graphics is too much of a generic term. You do have to break it down into its two components, which is visual fidelity and art style. One being objective and the other one being quite subjective. And where I think Elden Ring comes in is that it pushes away the fidelity side of graphics and then pushes the art style side of graphics, which is subjective, which makes sense that people are complaining about it, but subjectivity comes with a certain aspect of objectivity, and I would say that the game's art style objectively is good. Subjectively though, I would say the game is visually stunning. Visuals and vistas are all over the world of Elden Ring. It gives a sense of awe, and the developers intend for that. Every time you enter a new area, they always sort of push you through a route that has you overlooking the whole landscape. This does play into the exploration of the game. When you're overlooking this landscape, you can see all the points of interest, and it sort of makes you ask the question, oh, can I go there, and should I go there? There are about 13 main areas in the game, each with their own unique design, architecture, and art style. Some notable ones are Crumbling Farum Azula, the destroyed draconic city in the sky. Liurnia of the Lakes, the lands of sorcery. Caelid, the rotted battlegrounds of the east. Lindell, the corrupted capital city. And the snow-covered peaks of the mountaintops of the giants. I would say that the mountaintops of the giants is probably the least engaging because it's almost all just one color. But the question is, why is this so important? I think it very much adds to any media that you are consuming. I mean, it's pretty often when a new game releases and the graphics aren't so good that it gets talked about online quite a bit. And that's because I think visuals do matter. And watching or playing something that is visually pleasing, I think very much adds to the experience. To me, I see it as an extra step that a developer took to create something that was visually stunning when they didn't really have to. Elden Ring's gameplay is already great, but add the art style and a whole bunch of other things, and the experience for me just goes way up. I think this plays a part into spectacle and how almost every entertainment product nowadays plays into spectacle and has spectacle tied to it. And I do think that it is a necessity that is required to make something not so boring. I just think that a game, movie, or whatever has to be able to coordinate its themes with its art style. With Elden Ring, this comes with larger-than-life structures, glorious characters, and spectacle. I really just don't have any idea how Fromsoftware accomplished any of this. I think any of the developers in the art design sector of Fromsoftware really just deserve a hat off to them for their accomplishments, because the imagination and design of the world is simply spectacular. Fromsoftware have a unique way of telling stories. Rather than in-your-face dialogue or story cutscenes, most of their storytelling is environmental.
You are maidenless. Without
What does that mean?
And what cutscenes that they do have are very obscure and don't really give a whole lot away. Sometimes they do ask more questions than they answer, but they are some of the best cutscenes I've experienced. One of the reasons for that, I think, is because of how good and unique they actually are. It invoked a very satisfactory feeling in me. When I eventually got to this cutscene, it felt like a reward. They do this in an interesting way compared to most games, which usually like to just throw a whole bunch of story dump into a cutscene. Where I think the difference may lie is in a lot of games, they use cutscenes to just dump story, and you sort of have to just complete a mundane objective to sort of get those cutscenes, where Elden Ring and a few other games I can mention, they do like to throw you into a space where it's difficult to get to this point, and once you do get there, they do feel a lot more rewarding. An example of a different game that might do this are the Call of Duty Zombies games, where you have to complete quite a thorough and difficult Easter egg to get a cutscene that is usually extremely rewarding.
Boathouse, huh? Lost my virginity in a boathouse.
It doesn't count if you were by yourself, Sammy.
These cutscenes do make you ask certain questions which could engage you in the story even more. For instance, who is this character? Why are they here? How many more times am I going to have to watch this cutscene until I beat this fucker? I don't think that I can say that this is the best way of portraying cutscenes within a game. I think I'm quite biased to this because I find it extremely unique and it's one of my favorite aspects of the game. Most games find their footing in whatever way they can, and Elden Ring likes to do it in this way, and I think that's just the atmosphere they were going for rather than just story dump, because Fromsoftware are known to not just dump story on people. They do like to make people sort of work to uncover the story rather than just throwing it out there. What I didn't really understand about Elden Ring was that not a lot of people were actually talking about the cutscenes in the game, which made me think, oh, maybe these cutscenes aren't that great, maybe there's something wrong that I'm just not seeing. But I'm sticking to my guns and talking about it because I really do think that they deserve appreciation. And maybe it's possibly because this is my first Souls game and it's not unique to a lot of people, but to me it was extremely unique and it felt amazing to sort of get to these cutscenes. The best way for me to explain what I feel and how much I like these cutscenes would probably be to go through a few of them that are my favorite. My first pick will probably be Godfrey's cutscene. The first thing I like about this cutscene is, well, I think Godfrey is one of the best boss fights. I've explained this before. But what I think makes this cutscene so valuable is that you come up to sort of the end of the game and he is now the one thing blocking you from getting into the Erd Tree. Finally. I think the best part of this cutscene is where it starts to ramp up towards the second half of the cutscene. The developers use music as well as Godfrey's humongous presence to convey the last bit of the cutscene as quite epic and oh shit, I'm about to fight this guy.
Alas, I am returned. To be granted audience once more. Upon my name as Godfrey, the first Elden Lord.
The really cool thing about Godfrey's cutscene as well, it's one of the few in the game that transitions directly into combat, like almost instantly. He's right next to you when the cutscene ends. And what I like about it is towards the end of the cutscene, the music starts playing as soon as Godfrey says his name, and then it directly transitions into gameplay and the music is going in the background. It feels very epic. The tone is great, and it's one of my favorite cutscenes. Transitioning over to another one of my favorite cutscenes is also one of my favorite bosses in the game, and this is Dragon Lord Placidusax. I literally had to record his last name separately. The tonal difference between this cutscene and Godfrey's cutscene is extremely different, but I do prefer this cutscene's tone. I think why I like this cutscene so much is I really do love horror movies, and this cutscene builds quite a bit of tension. Does that with the slow, steady shots of Dragon Lord, as well as slowly going up to his heads and looking at his face. No music, nothing. It's just quiet, and the atmosphere is amazing, and it builds quite a lot of tension because you don't really know what the fuck you're getting into. This cutscene is definitely full of spectacle too, because it's this large, crazy arena with this large, crazy dragon. I think that spectacle tied with tension is a great combination. My favorite thing about this cutscene is that, like I mentioned before, it's slow, it's full of tension, it builds upon itself, and maybe I have a bias towards that, but it's one of my favorite and I had to mention it in this. The last cutscene I want to show off is my favorite cutscene in the game. It's, I think, a mixture between Godfrey and Placidusax, where it takes the tension of Placidusax and the music and atmosphere of Godfrey's fight and mixes them together to make one of my favorite, if not my favorite cutscene in the game, and this is Malekith's cutscene. Malekith's boss fight is also one of the hardest in the game. It's the third last boss fight in the game, so it is right at the end of your journey in the Lands Between. I feel the best way to explain this cutscene to you and how I feel about it is actually for you to watch it, and hopefully you feel the same way that I do.
Become my blade once more.
You can tell in this cutscene that Malekith's presence is very forthcoming. It's quite tension-filled. There's not much dialogue, but there's that music in the background, the sort of manly choir singing in the background. It's great. I love it. I could watch this cutscene many, many times over and I still don't get bored of it. I think it's the best if you don't get good. Elden Ring doesn't just use cutscenes to build its world. What the artists do emphasize at Fromsoftware is the level of world building in the environment. If you ever pick up the game and play, just pay attention one time when you go into an area and just look, just observe the surrounding infrastructure, the plants, everything sort of around you, and you can understand how much world building they actually do in this game. An easy example is Caelid. Caelid has got this huge rotting red sky. It also has some areas in the map where you see NPCs actually just battling it out. This plays into the story behind Caelid, where it was a rotted battleground where Radahn and Melania went and fought each other. Melania released her scarlet rot, and everywhere in Caelid became a sort of rotted wasteland. Examples like this are littered all over the lands between. For instance, if you go into certain areas, certain enemies might be there, and those enemies actually tell a story of what actually happened within the storyline of the lands between before you actually started playing the game, more of the lore.
Oh yeah, that makes chronological sense.
This environmental storytelling is extremely important when it comes to a game like this, because it induces the atmosphere into the player. You may not notice it, it's somewhat subconscious, but for me, I notice it quite a bit, and it really does play into the effect and the atmosphere of where you are, what you are fighting, and exploration that you are doing. It's a very washed over topic within the gaming industry, not in terms of Elden Ring. A lot of people talked about it in Elden Ring, but a lot of games don't actually do this very well. Elden Ring does this extremely well, and it should be applauded, and more games really need to do this more. The only thing about this topic area is that it can be quite subjective. The cutscenes to some people may not be as mind-blowing to other people as it was to me, and that can cause issues with people who may not like this type of storytelling / world building, and that makes sense, but it definitely needs to be brought up. The lore is great. It's some of the best I've ever seen / heard out of a lot of games that I've been exposed to. You can see where George R. Martin's sort of influence came in here. He did write a lot of the lore from what I can tell, and you can see his influence here. The problem is I can't even try to begin to break down the lore. I mean, just look at the main characters' names. Radahn, Rykard, Renala, Rani, Raya, Rodriga, Radagon, Mikela, Melina, Malekith, Melania, Morgoth, Millicent, Miriel, Moog, Godfrey, Godric, Garong, Godwyn, Gideon, Goldmask, Gandalf. Shit. Wrong ring. I don't think I need to say more than that. This is 100% not a lore channel. All I really know is that Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, and somehow her and Radagon are the same person, and Radahn rides a little horse.
Oh no!
Genuinely though, if you want to know the lore yourself, you have to read item descriptions and pay very good attention to the little details in the world. Doing that yourself can be quite tedious, so I watched a video. I think the lore is great. The story is a little bit lackluster. You sort of just a tarnish that enters the world, don't really know the reason why, and you have to become the Elden Lord to sort of save the lands between, but also you can choose different endings where the lands between get destroyed. It's a bit crazy. But in the end, I don't really have much to say about it just because I really don't know enough. And that's it. That's lore. Elden Ring filled a big hole that was getting bigger and bigger in the gaming industry. Right now it's hard to trust whether any gaming studio will bring out a fabulous game like Elden Ring. We got Activision churning out shitty Call of Duties left, right and center, EA can't get a grip on anything, and Bethesda ready to make Skyrim in space. Jesus Christ! The problem is now is that I don't trust any of these studios. I used to trust CD Projekt Red, but look what happened with Cyberpunk. There are just too many AAA games coming out now that just don't meet the standards of us gamers that we've set for a very long time now. But Elden Ring is the special black sheep, the one that stands out from the rest and is better than the rest. Elden Ring has restored my faith that there is still room in the industry to make great games. And for that reason I've given Elden Ring a 9 out of 10. My opinion doesn't mean much, but there has to be something at the end. We talked about the intensely difficult gameplay, the art style, the exploration, the lore and story, as well as the bosses and world building. And for these aspects of the game, I hope I've made it clear of how great of a game that Elden Ring is, and why it's on my list for gaming's perfections. This is the Elden Lord signing out. Have a shitty game session.